Hey guys, CB Super. Today we're going to be going over how to do this flying text animation. This tutorial that was actually brought on by Thomas Hansen's comment, is there any way we can do something similar to letters flying into the picture and form a title or a text? And this is in response to the arrows video that I made, where I made some arrows come on using either a particle system, or you can also use motion paths. If you haven't seen my motion paths video or that particle system video, you can watch either one of them. They'll both be up in the right hand corner in the cards. But today we're actually going to do something a little bit different using the DVE node, which is a node I don't use too often, and it's often used in 3D applications or using some kind of animation in like a 2.5D, which isn't quite full 3D, but it isn't quite 2D animation. Let's go ahead and jump into the Fusion comp and take a look at what I did for this specific animation. So while we're looking at this flow, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and design the actual final look, or the end state, or how it's going to look when it's all done animating, which is basically going to be our text in its final form. We're going to cut it up and prepare it for animation, and then we're going to use a DVE node to actually get the rough animation in. We'll adjust the timing with the Keyframe Editor. We're going to finalize some of that animation using the Spline Editor, and then we're going to finish out the look and composite it. This is going to be a pretty quick tutorial, but don't feel like this is the only way to do things. There are so many different ways to accomplish this exact same effect inside of DaVinci and Fusion. But let's go ahead and jump into a new Fusion composition, and we'll go ahead and get started from the beginning. Alright, so here we are in Fusion. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in some text. Now you'll notice that when I bring in a brand new text node, if I drop it in here, you'll see it already says the word text. And the reason it already says the word text and it isn't completely blank is because I've actually changed the default settings of my text node. And if you're ever curious on how you can set your default settings to change this text node, so whenever you bring it in, it'll bring it in the way that you want it, or the way that you regularly use it. All you have to do is fix it the way you want it. Say if I always want this to say CB Super, and maybe I know that I almost always want the text to be a little bit bigger and maybe track out a little bit because I just think that looks cool. I can go ahead and right click, come up to settings, and I can say save default. Now whenever I bring this any text node in, it's going to go ahead and be exactly the way that I want it, or I plan to use it most often. So that's just a little tip. Alright, so now we have our CB Super logo up. I'm actually going to track it out just a little bit more, and I'm not too concerned about the color or anything like that, but I am going to go ahead and start prepping it for cutting up. Now, when I was looking into how we could do this, the first thing I was thinking is there's probably other ways that we could animate the individual letters, maybe using a follower node. We could duplicate the node, we could do all kinds of different things. But the easiest way is, instead of masking it and putting it so that the masks would fly, we're actually just I'm gonna duplicate this node several times, and I'm just gonna have one letter for each node. And that way I can just animate those individual nodes and have them move all over the place. That way I can have everything easily controllable and I can animate them individually. I know that I have, let's see, CB Super, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 different letters. Instead of just duplicating this text 7 times, I'm actually going to Command C to copy it, and I'm going to Shift Command V 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. And the reason I'm doing Shift Command V instead of just Command V is I actually want instance text. And an instance text, if you haven't seen any of my other videos where I talk about some kind of instance node, is an instance text is going to, if I change any one of these parameters, it's going to change all of the parameters in all of these nodes. For what we want, we're actually going to de-instance some of the parameters, but the reason I'm doing it this way is because the only thing that I want to de-instance is going to be this styled text. I'm going to want that de-instance. And I'm also going to want to de-instance the center, because the center is what I know I'm going to be animating that center position when I move it into position in the very beginning. I'm going to show you how to do the first letter here, and then I'm going to speed through just to get it all done so that you're not just staring at me doing the exact same thing over and over again. So I'm going to come into this first letter, which is going to actually be the starting C. And I'm going to go ahead and de-instance the styled text. So all you're going to do is right click on the word styled text, come down to de-instance, and then I can go ahead and erase this and just type in a capital C. and then come over to the next panel over, and where it says center, I'm going to go ahead and right click again and hit D instance. Now I can go ahead and move this text, and I can move it anywhere I want, but I'm actually going to put it right where this C is in the original CB Super, and that's why we left that CB Super there, so to make it real easy for us to just be able to see exactly where these letters need to go. Alright, now I'm just going to do the same thing with each one of these. One thing I am going to do though is I'm actually going to rename this just to make it easy on myself when I start animating. I'm going to go ahead and name it C. And I'm just going to do the same thing for the rest of these letters. Okay, and we're done. So actually now that I've got this text the way that I like it, I don't need to keep the CB Super. I can go ahead and delete the actual styled text. Now the nice thing about doing it this way is that I can still control the color real easily, and it's going to control the color of all of the actual text nodes. Okay, now that we're done with that, we can go ahead and move on to the next part. So the next part is actually, we're going to move this over a little bit. We're going to bring in a different node. As I talked a little bit about in the beginning, we're going to use the DVE node. So to get that, just shift space, type in DVE. It's going to bring in this DVE transform node. And this DVE transform node is actually quite interesting. So if we go ahead and load it up here, we'll notice the first thing is that there's actually a pivot point. Now the pivot point is at 0.5.5, so it's at the center of the screen origin. We're going to want to probably move that over to whichever letter we're animating. Otherwise, when we start doing the rotation, it's actually going to rotate around this pivot point versus the pivot point of the C. Now, if that's what you're going for, then you can just leave the pivot point where it's at. But to change the pivot point, you can actually come over here and just simply start moving this X. Now, it might be a little hard to see, and if it is too hard to see, you can always add some kind of background. So if we just bring in a background, if you want, you can actually just bring this background and you can just drop it onto this the very end of the merge 7 square, and that will now merge a background in, and then we can simply just Command T will switch those outputs around so that now we can see it's on a black background. We can also reconnect this media node just in case we want to start viewing things when we jump back and forth. The one thing that I really like about this DVE node is it is super fast. I haven't even animated it yet, but if I jump over and we start looking at it, this cache bar is going to almost immediately start catching up. It's really fast, and this is even after we've animated it and even added some kind of motion blur. You'll notice that getting a real-time render view is really fast with the DVE node, and that's cool, and it's one of the added perks of using this node. And it can perform much like a regular transform node as well. But then you get some added features like this pivot where you can start rotating it in kind of a 2.5D space. So let's go ahead and continue moving this pivot. We'll move it all the way over to maybe just somewhere in the middle of the C. And then we got to kind of decide where we want the animation to end. And I like to work backwards when doing something like this where it's kind of a logo or a title reveal. Maybe I want it to end, I don't know, right around, we'll just say 70. And so I'm going to go ahead and start my animation here. Now I know I'm going to want to move this center point because I'm going to want to move this off screen to make it so it flies in. I'm also going to want to animate these rotations for X, Y, and Z. Because I want them all to end and all of the letters to come together at 70, I'm now going to decide, okay, at what point do I want the C to start moving? It's kind of easier because we can just go back and we can adjust the timing of the animation later in the Keyframe Editor. So right now, I'm actually just going to bring this to maybe 30. I'm just going to go ahead and move this off center. I'm actually going to grab this DVE, and you'll notice that although the pivot is over here, the transform handle is still in the center, and that's fine because once we start to rotate this, you'll notice that it is rotating in the center, but it's also rotating wherever that little X is. So let's just say I want to just kind of mess up these rotations a little bit, and then I can go ahead and throw this off screen as if it's going to be coming from left to right. I can also start to bend these, and I can animate these if I want. You still have all the normal motion path control that you would of any movement, but the only difference is now as it comes in, it's going to be spinning around. It's going to be spinning around and rotating quite nicely. Now we might have actually gone a little too far, so let's go ahead and bring this a little closer till it's just off screen. And now as it starts coming in, you'll see quite a bit more movement. All right, let's go ahead and go back to 70 now, and let's go ahead and do the next one. We'll bring in the same node, DVE, and you'll notice the difference between this node, DVE1 and DVE2, is that you can always tell when a node has no keyframes that have been animated, because the title will be in the center versus it'll move over to the left once it has some keyframes. There'll also be a little keyframe indicator letting you know that some keyframe has been added to this node. In the same fashion, we're going to want to move this pivot point over to the B. So on the pivot section, I'm just going to go ahead and simply move it over to the B. It's now moved over to the B, so I can go ahead and key the center. I'm going to go ahead and key the X, Y, and Z. And I'm actually going to drive it over to 30 now, and I'm just going to mess up some of these. And I'm just going to move it off the screen a little bit. All right, and then back to 70, I'm just going to repeat the step all the way with the rest of the letters, and I'll go ahead and pick up there. Alright, so we're all done doing the base animations in these DVE nodes. Let's kind of take a look at the rough animation and see what needs to be tweaked. And again, like you'll just notice that it immediately starts caching, which is pretty cool. I think I've mentioned before, but my computer isn't exactly the fastest computer. It's a mid 2014 MacBook Pro with just 16 gigs of RAM. So, alright, so it's already cached, and as quick as I could say that, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Alright, so animation is definitely a little different than our last one. Some of them seem to be kind of like floating around a little bit. It's actually kind of cool. Alright, and that's actually because I didn't push them as far off screen as I did in this one over here. You'll notice they all kind of fly in very linearly. This one almost moves around like there's some kind of like swirling wind around, which is actually kind of cool. I think I'm going to leave that. You guys are more than welcome to change it to however you guys like. I'm just showing you one way. Just keep in mind that there's so many different ways to do this. We're just using the DVE node this time. There's our rough animation. Now let's go ahead into each one of the nodes in the Keyframe Editor, and we'll actually start to move this animation, because the way that I actually want this to happen is I don't want them to all come in at the exact same time. I actually want the C to kind of roll in first, and then followed by the B, and then the S, and then the U, and so on. So in order to do that, I'm actually going to come into the Keyframe Editor, and I'm going to adjust that base curve. And so we know that all of the animation is in these DVE nodes. So one easy way to do is just kind of like move these DVE nodes so that right next to wherever your letters are. You could also come in here and rename this. Like this could be C animation or B animation, or DVE-S, DVE-U. I mean, come up with a good naming scheme for your flow. If you're going to be handing this off for somebody else to use, it's going to be very important to add different things to your flow. Other things that are going to actually help you would be to use things like underlays. So if you shift space, type in underlay, there's actually an underlay node which is really quite helpful for organizing all of your Fusion flows. And you can even use things called sticky notes. So a sticky note is pretty neat because you can actually write notes in here for anybody else that may be looking at your composite later on. So you just double click in the note and you can type in something like text is underlay 1. You can even leave in like explicit notes like don't touch anything in underlay 1, or leave the DVE nodes alone, or whatever. I mean, it really depends on who you're working with and what you think they're going to be using your Fusion comp for, or if you guys are just working and sharing a Fusion comp. So let's go ahead and just kind of move this over. I know I talk a little bit about the Keyframe Editor in other videos, but what we're going to be doing in this video is really, really easy. But in order to do it, we're actually going to start down here, and we're going to leave DVE7 alone because DVE7 is R, and R is going to be the last one to come in. I'm not going to really mess with it, but I do want to come into DVE6 all the way to 1 and just change up the animation. So if I click on the twirl down, which is that little arrow that points down, I know I want to play with the X, Y, Z, and center rotation. So if I just click on all of them and shift click down on to the center, I want to move this whole animation over to the left because I want it to happen just a little bit sooner. Now, not too much. I don't want it to be too obvious. I just want it to be a little bit more flowy. So I'm going to do this to each one of them. And you can see that this animation now has moved over to the left a little bit. And so now I'm going to go into DVE 5. All right, so now that we have all of these animations kind of cascading down to the end, we could actually click out of Keyframe Editor and let's jump back over and just kind of take a look at what this animation is doing now. It's not super annoying. It's actually fairly subtle. The animations are kind of moving from left to right and coming in on the CB, and then the super comes in a little bit after, and that's cool. That's exactly what I was going for. So we've kind of tailored a little bit the timing of the animation. Now let's go into the actual individual animation, and we can smooth out some of that animation and kind of finalize it a little bit more using the Spline Editor. So the Spline Editor, like the Keyframe Editor, is a super powerful animation tool for refining the actual look of the animations, and it's pretty easy to do, but I'm going to just make it a little bit easier on myself, and I'm only going to limit it to one letter for right now, just so while I'm looking at this one letter, I can kind of look at how this animation is taking place. So this animation takes place kind of linearly, right? So if we look into where the movement is taking place, I'm not too concerned about how it's swiveling around and whatnot, but I do want to look at the displacement of the center. And as you can see, it's a straight line, which means it's very linear. It moves in a mathematical formula that just kind of goes from start to finish and doesn't really change until it completely stops. So you probably remember, if you've ever done any After Effects work, easy ease in, easy ease out. Well, we can also do the same thing. You can also come in here, you can click, you can hold down, and you can capture both of those keyframes, and you can Shift S will smooth those out, and that will be the same as like easy ease in, easy ease out, but we can go a little bit farther than that. This will smooth out the animation, but what it does is it actually slows down the animation in the beginning and it slows down the animation in the end. So if that's exactly what you want, then great, but what if that's not what I want? Maybe I want it to be a little bit slower in the front and then kind of speed up towards the end. Well, we can do that too by just pulling one of the handles, the tangent handles, towards each other. Now it's going to move a little bit faster in the beginning, but it's still going to slow into the end. And I want them almost all to slow into an ease in the end because I don't want it to be too jarring. So we're going to go ahead and call C done, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to DVE2, which is going to be the B. So I'm going to go ahead and twirl up on DVE2 and then twirl down on DVE2, and I'm just going to click on the displacement. If I click on all of these, I'm going to see the tangents or the line animation for each of the rotation, the Z, X, and Y rotation, as well as the displacement of that center node, which I don't necessarily want. While there's a check mark in it, you can actually edit these handles, but if I want to just be able to see those but then not be able to edit them, now I will only be able to edit what has a check mark on it. So that can be kind of handy too if you want to see the timing and how you're affecting the timing of whatever you're changing to whatever you want to stay the same. For this, I'm actually just going to get rid of it because it looks a little bit more confusing, and I'm going to kind of work on this B rotation, or this B movement, if you will. All right, so it kind of like floats in and then comes down, but I want it maybe to come in a little bit faster. So in order to come in a little bit faster, I'm actually going to bring this handle back and up a little bit, and then on this handle back here, I'm actually going to kind of round it out. So now what it's going to do is it's going to start pretty quick, and then it's going to kind of float down, which is exactly what I'm looking for. Right, so that one we're going to call done. And of course, you can play around in this Spline Editor for days and still not be happy. But let's go ahead and move on to DVE3 or S and look at the displacement here. All right, so that one's actually not too bad. Let's go ahead and take a look at what this will look like if we give this one, you can also give something a bounce. Now to give it a bounce, you kind of actually overshoot it a little bit. You don't want to go too far because it gets really kind of awkward looking. Because what you're doing is you're changing the timing, but you're not adding a keyframe, and sometimes that can do weird things. But that kind of works. You notice it kind of goes a little bit higher, and then it settles back down. Let's just see we'll just leave that the way it is, and then let's go ahead and move on to 4. And we can always come back to that later if we don't like the way that looks. Alright, so let's see what U's doing. Okay, so you'll notice on U, there's actually no displacement. And the reason there's no displacement is because I actually didn't move the center at all. I actually used the Z move. So we're going to go ahead and click on DVE4, but we actually only want to see the Z move in this particular instance, because this is where all of the animation is taking place. It's actually just getting larger or smaller, or it's moving in Z space or modified Z space. So as it comes back down, I'm actually just going to smooth this one out. So we're going to go ahead and just smooth it out by Shift S, and let's go ahead and take a look at how that looks. Okay, you know what? I actually don't like the way that looks, so I'm actually going to, I want it to stop a little bit harder. Okay, yeah, that works. Kind of obscures the view a little bit of the frame, but I'm okay with that. So let's go ahead and call that one done, and then move on to 5. Alright, perfect. And again, you can play around with this forever. It's the Spline Editor, it's super powerful. Let's go ahead and jump out again and take a look at what it all looks like all cached up. Okay, cool. So we've finalized our animation with the Spline Editor, and now we have a really interesting look where a lot of the text is coming in at different timing, but it's also coming in differently. So we've tailored the animation to the way that we want it. And pretty easily. You saw that only took us a few minutes of playing around in the Spline Editor. Now let's go ahead and jump back into Fusion and finish out the composite. Alright, so we've already added a background, but let's say we want to change this background. All we have to do is come into the background node. And I know we use solid colors a lot of the time, but we can also use gradients. And if you come over to the background where it says type, and you type in solid color, and you click on the twirl down, it's going to give you different gradient types. So you can do a horizontal, a vertical, 4-corner, or a gradient. I usually only use a gradient, to be honest. And you can tailor this by moving this gradient line, just like if you were in Photoshop. You can move this gradient line to however you want it. And don't feel like you have to use all of the color on there. You can have the gradient come in from the side. You can change the gradient type from linear to any one of these other types like reflect or square or cross. And that's actually kind of cool. And then you can even tailor this, the actual gradient amount. So if you want more black or more white, or if you even want more gray, you can change this this white to an actual gray, and so now you have more gradient into actual gray from the black. You can push the black up a little bit, or you can even decrease the amount of black by making it closer to, say, gray. And of course we can go into different colors, so maybe we want to go to some kind of like opposing color, like a, I don't know. I don't know that that's actually, I don't know my color wheel, but I don't think that's on the other side. But we could do, like, say we want to do a teal and orange look. We can come back in here to the text, change this color to, say, maybe some kind of bright orange. And now we can come into the background and we can, oh, maybe go for some kind of blue. Like, that doesn't look amazing, but it's, you know, it's definitely an option. So let's say we want to make this like to white. So now the very center of it will be light blue and the very outside will be white. And just make sure you're in like a 32 float which you should be. I want to say that it's almost always in like a 32 float. It's just going to give you a little bit more color bit depth. Let's say that we're happy with that. We can also come in here and we can finalize the text by maybe we want to add an outline, and we don't even want to have a fill for the text. Well, if you come over here to the actual shading elements, it's the 4th tab in, you'll notice that there's a select element up here. And by default, the only one that is actually enabled is 1. But if you click on this twirl down and you go to 2, there's actually another element here. And actually there's 8 different elements. And you can change what these elements are, but you have to enable them to actually see them. And you'll notice that by default, this next element, number 2, is actually, it's called red outline, but it doesn't have to be red outline. You can actually change it to any color you want. So let's say we want this color to actually be the orange, and then we can come back over to element 1, and we can actually turn the opacity, which is the fill, all the way down. So now we have this really neat, neat outline of our letters. And how easy was that? It's all still inside that one text node. And of course we're controlling all of our letters using this, I guess you would call it like parent text node. And we can also control the thickness if we wanted to thicken that line up a little bit. We could, of course, we could change the color. You can change the joint style if you want it to be. This isn't a very super angular text that I already have it on, but you can change the text too. You can also come into the actual text style, and you can change the font, and it's going to update the font on all of the text. So if I wanted to go to my typical font of uppercut angle, I can use that. I'm not going to, because I would have to track it out a little bit further than what I've tracked it now, and you can't really track very well using this method. There is other methods that we could use that'd be a little bit more procedural, and if we were going to turn this into some kind of template, we would probably look for a more procedural method of recreating this animation, which maybe I'll do that in a future episode. But I really wanted to show this DVE node and how you can use it to animate some text flying off the screen. I thought that'd be pretty cool. That's pretty much it. The one thing that we didn't really go over is motion blur. Again, because motion blur blurs out something that is actually moving, you can come into the DVE node, and if you come to the end of the tab in the settings and just drop down to where motion blur is, that's where your motion blur tab is going to be. You can do that for each one of these, and it'll add in a nice amount of motion blur. And even though we just have this outline, it'll still blur that motion as it comes in. So that's pretty cool. And so I'm going to call that done. I'm going to go ahead and let this cache while I talk, but just to kind of recap over some of the things we went over, we designed the final look first by creating that end state text, and then we used that text to like cut up other texts and put them in the place of our text so that we would have kind of a placeholder for that CB Super text. We made a rough animation with that DVE node, which was really easy and really fast to render. We adjusted the timing with the Keyframe Editor, and we finalized that animation with the Spline Editor. We finished the look and we composited it, and that's pretty much it. So this is the final output of our flying text animation. I hope you guys got something out of this. If you just happened on this tutorial and you're new to the channel, please leave a like, maybe subscribe if you feel like watching some more videos. I got tons of other videos on tutorials and tools that I actually make for you guys to use. We just hit over 1,000 subscribers, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank every one of you guys. This wouldn't be possible without you. I'm really having a great time making these tutorials, and I hope you guys enjoy them. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.